Welcome to Basic Brewing Radio for Thursday, April 25th, 2013. I'm James Spencer. Here at Basic Brewing Radio, we're all about home brewing. This week, Joe and Dennis Fisher, authors of The Homebrewer's Garden, answer your questions about growing ingredients for your beer yourself. If you're new to home brewing and would like to get into the hobby for the first time, check out our website, basicbrewing.com, where you can find archives of our audio and video podcasts and our DVDs to walk you through basic and more advanced brewing techniques. You can follow me on Twitter. My username is Basic Brewing, all one word. Also, you can find me on Facebook at facebook.com/basicbrewing.james. Our show page on Facebook is at facebook.com/basicbrewing. Thanks again to everybody clicking on the Amazon.com associate link on our basicbrewing.com site. Whenever you think of Amazon, think of us first and click on our associate link. It'll take you to Amazon. There you can shop, and we'll get credit for what you buy, and we'll get a little cut of that. So you'll be helping to support the show, and it won't cost you any extra, and we greatly appreciate everybody who's done so already. We'll also have associate links for Brew Your Own magazine and the American Homebrewers Association on our site, too. Our Basic Brewing iPhone app is on iTunes, and our Android app is on Amazon.com. We're on the BlackBerry podcast directory, we're on the Stitcher app, and I've been told we're on the Windows Phone directory, too. Check out our brewer's logbook at basicbrewingshop.com. In the front is a calendar that you can use to track your fermentations and plan your brews. And the good thing about the calendar is that it is blank. So you have a full year of calendar pages. It doesn't matter that it's almost May here, and usually you don't buy calendars this time of year, but this one's blank, so you can start a full year of brewing and track up to 50 batches of brew in the back of the book with those log pages as well. If you want to put a tip in our tip jar, some coinage in our guitar case, you can go to basicbrewing.com/support, and thanks very much to everybody who has done so already. Protect your precious beer with one of our growler bags. These are really cool. The bag is essentially a cylindrical cooler that is just the right size to accommodate a 64-ounce growler or a couple of 22-ounce bombers or 3 12-ounce bottles as well. It has an adjustable strap so you can sling it over your shoulder. Keep it in your car like I do, and that way when you run by a cool brewery and they have something on tap you want to get a bomber of, you got your bomber, you're not bomber, but your growler in the car. So anyway, check those out at basicbrewingshop.com. We only have a limited number of those available, so get those while you can. This week is a better week than last week, thank goodness. Our thoughts are with all of you in Boston and in Texas, who unfortunately dominated the 24-hour news cycle a week ago. And here at home, I appreciate all the kind comments following last week's episode with the late Dave Kahns. Let's switch gears this week and talk about some good news. At this moment in time, the Alabama homebrew legislation has been reported favorably by the Senate Job Creation and Economic Development Committee and is awaiting being put on the schedule for the whole Senate to vote on it. If you go to alahomebrewing.org, you can see a list of the folks that you need to contact if you are an Alabama homebrewer to move this legislation forward. So please jump up and take part in that. Listener Jameson forwarded a link to me about good legislation news for Texas commercial brewers. The Texas Senate has voted to give craft brewers and brew pubs new opportunities to sell their beer. The legislation would reportedly allow brew pubs to package some beer for sale by outside retailers and allow production breweries to sell some beer directly to consumers. So good news for Texas brewers down there and beer lovers. Good news here on the podcast front as well. This week I posted a new episode of Basic Brewing Video where Steve and I conduct a specialty grain experiment similar to what Zod O'Connor and I did on this podcast on the audio side. And for those of you who are wondering, after watching the podcast, my wife got tired of tending the fish, so the fish tank is gone. But worry not, the fish are alive and well. They went back to the fish store to find new homes elsewhere. One more thing, if you're near Northwest Arkansas, put this on your calendar. The second annual Fayetteville Foam Fest is going to take place May 4th. The festival will feature the local breweries that you've heard on this show, and it will benefit Feed Fayetteville, which is a charity. You can go to FayettevilleFoamFest.com for more information, FayettevilleFoamFest.com. All good news. So we're a bit more chipper this week. Now let's continue the good stuff. Let's talk to the Fisher brothers about growing some good stuff for our brew pots. Well, Joe Fisher and Dennis Fisher, welcome to Basic Brewing Radio.
Thank you.
I've had your book for a few years, in fact, and I don't know why it's taken me so long to get around to talking to you guys. I want to thank Brad Hunter for being the intermediary and kind of getting us connected. Mm-hmm. Your book inspired me to plant barley in my yard, in my home garden.
Oh, cool.
And I planted a bunch of it. I don't know how big the plot was, maybe 30 feet by 40 feet. But it looked great. And at the end of the year, it was all brown and it had heads on the barley. But I think I planted it the wrong time of year because, like many people I know, the heads were empty. So I don't know what happened there, but it sure looked great.
Wow, that's an interesting problem. Interesting. We have not encountered that, but there's a good question for you.
That's a really good question. I mean, it's not as if it needs to be pollinated.
No.
So you wouldn't have pollination failure.
You would think that a good-looking crop of grain would be
And it's not like it's a biennial, but you may be right that you didn't plant it early enough in the season, or it wasn't a long enough season to develop. But the other thing is that barley is really, it's a northern crop. It's more, it needs a cooler climate.
That is true. I wonder
and it may just be far south enough that the crop just failed because it won't grow there.
Yeah, it gets pretty darn hot down here.
That's speculation.
It may well have cooked. That's really interesting. I hadn't really thought about that before.
And you might even be a case where you could grow it more successfully in the winter than in the summertime.
Right. Yeah. Winter barley is it's sort of a different approach to growing barley. There's spring barley like we grow.
Yeah.
But in some climates, winter barley works better.
Winter wheat.
Yeah.
So I've already stumped the experts. First question.
I thought that was a reasonable answer we gave.
So let's get into some background on the book before we get into to details. I've got lots of questions from Facebook and Twitter. But kind of give me the background of you guys, your brothers. Right. Did you both get into brewing at the same time? And how did you get to be experts and authors?
Right. Well, we both got into brewing on the same day, basically. We walked into a homebrew store in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, Stout Billy's, in 1991. Mm-hmm. And that was a day that changed everything because really, we went in and it was like, this is amazing. Yeah. Look at all this stuff.
Yeah.
We can do this.
There was kind of a technology explosion just then, and a lot of we'd done some home brewing. We'd made some cider, but the equipment wasn't readily available, and you could get carboys, but they were really fragile and like basically huge balloons made of glass, and it was hard even to track down a decent brewing yeast. But
right.
Suddenly
there were no books
at that time. Everything became available.
Right.
It
was a sort of a brewing revolution, home brewing revolution right around then that we were involved in. There had been an earlier one in the 70s, but this was the start of the whole home brewing thing, and we just loved it. We started brewing and just went from there.
Yeah, and actually we wanted to write a Stout Billy's homebrew cookbook.
Yeah,
and we pitched it to our publisher, Story, and they said, we love the first chapter. And the first chapter was about brewing
Can kits.
beer from can kits. How to adapt can kits and add more grains and add more different yeasts and more interesting hops, and what you can do to improve them and make them more interesting. And we wound up writing a book for them on that premise.
Right. And we'd been brewing for a few years at that point. We were not experts by any means, but we had a lot of good help from the Stout Billy people. And I think it was a good little book. I think it actually covered the material. It was easy to read. It was friendly. And, if you want to go that route, making beer from can kits, I think it was a pretty good approach. And that's how we got started. And then from there, we went on to write The Homebrewer's Garden and Brewing Made Easy, also for Story.
And Brewing Made Easy is being re-released?
Yes, it is.
In a second edition.
Second edition is available this spring. And it's we were able to update it, and which was a nice thing to be able to do after about because I think it was about 15 years ago. So things have changed. Things have definitely changed in homebrewing since then. A lot of things have stayed the same, but there's a lot of new wrinkles, and we were able to. We've gotten together with another homebrewing store here in Bangor, which opened last year, which is the Central Street Farmhouse, and there's a couple of young guys who are really gung-ho about brewing, and we talked to them about what's new, what's happening now in brewing, and so I think it's almost a really cutting edge kind of a book, even though it's a really basic brewing book. We were able to, I think, somebody starting out in the hobby now would be able to find some really interesting stuff in it.
Now, your Homebrewer's Garden book has been out for about that same length of time.
Yep.
It's really easy to read. It's fun to read as well, and it's got a whole bunch of stuff for a fairly small book.
Right.
Does it need updating? Are you working on a second release of that?
We'd love to do another edition.
Yeah,
of that.
we'd be welcome to do that, but we haven't been asked to. And the other thing about Homebrewer's Garden is it hasn't gone out of print. It just keeps getting printed.
Yeah. And it's doing better now, actually. Yeah. I mean, in the last couple of years, there's been a real uptick in sales, and which is nice.
Yeah. I mean, there are other things that we would like to add. We'd like to talk about some of our local hop pests that didn't make it into the book. But, I mean, essentially, what we have to say about growing your own is in there. I mean, but since we wrote that book, we've been farming for several years, and we've known a lot more about
about growing in general.
Horticulture and botany and plants than we used to.
Right. When we wrote that book, we were organic gardeners, but since then we've been farming organically for just about that number of years, 16 years. So we've got a different approach. It's a different perspective on just growing things in general, and we've been growing hops, throughout that whole period. So
the book is divided into talking about hops, of course, and herbs, including a section on dubious herbs that we may want to talk about. Grains, not only how to grow your own grains, but how to malt your own grains and how to make your own crystal malt. And then recipes in the back as well, where you can take everything that you've learned how to grow and make it into beers. Is there? I imagine that there are some questions that maybe we should just start on from Facebook and Twitter.
Start with an easy one.
Okay, let's start off with a softball question from Facebook. Tom Jones says, any suggestions for wild plants or things we might already have growing around us to use in brewing?
Okay, that's interesting.
Dandelions.
Yep.
They're a really nice bittering hop or herb hop substitute thing. And they're readily available.
Yeah, nettles would be another one. We actually we grow wild hops here. I guess you would. They're feral. They're varieties. There probably were varieties at one point that just went wild locally. Maine was actually a significant hop growing area at one time. So what we grow here, instead of growing, say, Cascade or some of the other more familiar hops, is we grow some that we collected wild in the area. And we find that they're really well adapted to local growing conditions. We just call it Orrington because that's the town where they came from.
Yeah.
And I think they're kind of similar to Cascade, but
it's also possible just if you're really lucky, you can find hops growing wild, on like abandoned farmsteads, and some places you can spot the vines growing up trees and things like that.
Right. So that's one way to use wild plants.
A lot of the brewing herbs we talk about, like yarrow, horehound, things like that, you can find them growing wild.
Yeah.
It's just as easy to wildcraft them as it would be to grow them in your garden.
Sure, and there's spruce, which we use a lot. We wild gather that anyway, so that's not something we grow specifically. Of course, it doesn't grow in all parts of the world. Country probably doesn't grow where you are. We're kind of we know more about northern plants, but rose hips, for instance, they grow wild. Raspberries. There's definitely juniper is a good one. Mm. It can just be found growing. And then there's places in the country where ginseng grows wild. So, yeah.
You also mentioned milk thistle, which unfortunately grows where it's not wanted most of the time. And then also there may be some things in people's gardens already that they may not associate with brewing. For instance, you also mentioned coriander, or coriander people know, but they may not know that it is the seed of cilantro.
Yeah,
and I've actually harvested that, and that's a booger to separate the seeds from the stems after you've dried those out. So there's a bunch of things around, including also lavender. You mentioned lavender, and lemon balm is probably in some people's gardens as well.
Sure.
So how do you? I mean, did you experiment with all these herbs to figure out the proportions, or how do you? When you find these things, how do you know what's good, and how do you establish guidelines of how much to use?
Right.
A lot of them we got out of old recipes. We did quite a bit of experimental brewing when we were working on the book. We found, for instance, we changed our heather ale recipe quite a bit, because in some of the traditional recipes for heather ale call for an enormous amount of heather. And we found that only a few ounces was perfectly sufficient to make a really bitter, really purple heather ale.
Right.
A lot of our initial information came out of old recipes, and then we experimented enough to kind of tweak them a little bit. We don't want people making beer that's so bitter or so sour that a person used to drinking modern hoppy beers is not going to be able to drink that.
Right. And some of these older brewing herbs, they can be really bitter. Horehound or gentian. It doesn't take much to make a really bitter beer, and maybe not the kind of bitterness that you're used to or that you really accept in a beer. So, you have to do these things advisedly.
And you mentioned old recipes. Your section on dubious brewing herbs that I mentioned, a lot of these, like wormwood, is it's a recognizable brewing ingredient, but you list it as poisonous if taken internally.
Yeah, we erred on the side of caution. with the bog myrtle and the horehound,
right?
And the,
like wormwood has of course it has a reputation, being a sort of a psychotropic kind of a compound.
Yeah, it used to be used in absinthe.
People are certainly using wormwood in brewing, and it's certainly not doing them any damage at all. But we were a little bit cautious on some of these things.
You listed Angelica, Sweet Gale, or Bog Myrtle.
Bog myrtle you might want to stay away from.
Yeah, and Angelica grows in like the same kind of environments as some really poisonous plants like water hemlock, and they look very similar. They both look like giant dill plants with yellow flowers. So we kind of want to discourage people from wildcrafting that stuff.
Yeah, bog myrtle and wormwood, they sound like they'd pair nicely with Eye of Newt.
Yes, hemlock.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to brew like the Druids, you can hunt down some of these herbs.
Well, let's. There were a bunch of questions on hops, so why don't we peel into those? Philip Lamb from France says, "How do you transplant 2-year-old hops?" And then I'll take that one, and I'll search for some others while you're answering that.
Okay, a 2-year-old hop is probably going to be a pretty sizable crown. And rather than dig it up and try and move it, which is something that I've done, I've dug up a mature hop plant and put it in a pot and moved it. I would recommend taking cuttings from the rhizomes, going around the outside of the mound and cutting off the rhizomes and then starting them in smaller pots rather than trying to dig up the mature plant and moving it.
Yeah, it's amazing how much hops will grow underground without your knowing it until you start digging around in there.
Yeah,
and if you really wanted to move the whole plant, you could separate it, into manageable chunks and dig it out that way. They can handle a lot
of stress.
Stress.
Yeah, and the time to do that, if you were going to do either of those things, is right around now.
Right, spring.
Early spring when the ground starts to be workable.
Yeah.
And before the hop plants really wake up.
Yeah. And that would be different in different parts of the country.
Yeah, Justin and Becca Bruce, I assume it's Justin asking, how late is too late to uproot and transplant hops in the season without doing too much damage to them? Should I cut them back now when they're 1 to 5 feet tall? If I plan to move them soon, or just wait to cut them back, or not cut them back, move them as they are?
Yeah, the answer to that one is move them in the spring when they first start, to show growth. Take cuttings early in the season, as soon as the ground can be worked, kind of thing.
Yeah. Hops are tough.
Yeah.
They can stand a lot of abuse. They might be set back. You could probably move them at any time of the year. But
maybe not in the middle of the season when they've got all kinds of top.
Yeah, sure. That wouldn't be so great. But they can stand. They wouldn't be very manageable at that stage either.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have told the story several times on the podcast of I had some hops that my wife got from a seed catalog, for flowers, and they never had any cones on them. So after about 3 years, I dug them up out of the garden, which this thing was a monstrous sized, beast under the ground. I dug it all up and threw it all in the compost heap, and it's real happy in the compost heap now.
Yep.
So it grows quite well.
So it might be a male?
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
Yep.
Chris Newsom says, I live in a climate where the last freeze/frost date is June 1st. Yet our Centennial hops are already at least 2 feet tall. What effect will a frost have on my hops?
Well, It depends.
Yeah, I mean, late in the season, when your hops are all, say your hops are the actual strobiles are ready to mature and ready to be picked, you should pick them because they're not going to do very well if they get frosted. They won't really hurt the plants that much. I mean, the plants are quite tough. And I mean, if your last frost-free date, your frost-free date sounds like it's around the same time as our frost-free date. So, the plants will be sending up a few shoots. And those first leaves might get a little bit shriveled, but as soon as you don't have any more frost, the hops are going to start making up for lost time and sending up more branches and more leaves. So yeah. It depends on what end of the season you're talking about.
Sounds like you're talking about the spring.
Yeah, I mean, a late frost in the early season isn't going to really hurt the plants that much, unless they've got a lot of top growth on them. But hops are quite tough.
Tony Perkins says, "Why do my hops want to climb their trellis counterclockwise? I live in Western Washington."
Well, we don't know much about conditions in Washington. I mean, maybe in the southern hemisphere they'd want to turn the other way, but so counterclockwise.
They're left-handed hops.
Yeah, left-handed hops. Well, I mean, no, yeah.
Wouldn't they want to grow counterclockwise anyway?
No. Well, I mean, looking down, it would be clockwise.
Yeah,
I don't know why. Stumped us again. I don't know. If he's looking up.
That's right. He's looking the wrong way. Should stop lying down next to the hop plants. Tony from Twitter asks, what kinds of hops are better for more temperate coastal regions? I'm in the North Oregon coast and would like to grow hops. Seems like to me that's the place to be.
That's a good place to grow hops. Pretty much any hop you wanted to grow, you could grow there. The thing, hops that kind of jump out as good coastal hops would be like Fuggles, Kent, Willamette, these kind of English style hops,
right.
And also basically. You should look around his area and see, what kind of varieties of hops that the local hop growers are growing, and just
do the same.
Yeah, use local knowledge. Oregon's a great place to grow hops.
And Caleb says the varieties that grow best in central Texas. Now that's a different story.
Hot and dry.
Oh.
I know in northwest Arkansas, Cascades do really well, and Magnum has done well in other people's yards. But the English hops that I've planted have given up the ghost, and the German plants I've got Satz and Hallertauer, and those are barely hanging on. So go American in Texas. No surprise there, I guess.
Grow something that likes heat and drought.
Yeah.
Our Steve Esbach from Facebook says, are burrowing varmints attracted to hop rhizomes as they are planted and mature? So, or maybe we could transition into what are the biggest pests for hops?
Sure.
We haven't had a problem with. Our biggest underground pest up here is voles, and we haven't really had a problem with voles on the hops.
Yeah, there's not that much for a vole to eat on hops.
They've got these big fat underground rhizomes. I mean, I could see where an underground rodent might want to eat them, but I never actually heard of that happening.
Mm-hmm.
So, you might have a bigger problem if you were mulching them for the winter with the animals, nesting underneath the mulch. But I don't know if they really eat the rhizomes or not. There are a lot of caterpillars that like hops.
Right. They're specific to hops. There's the hop merchant, which is a kind of a spiky, large caterpillar that people who grow hops have probably seen. Yeah. And there's a hop looper, which is just like a little inchworm, which also can do quite a bit of damage. Both of those can be pretty easily controlled with one or two applications of BT in a season. We just take a backpack sprayer and just basically just shoot the plants, and that seems to do it for us.
Yep. When question mark butterfly.
Yeah, that's the adult of hop merchant. Yeah.
It's like a 3 tufted tussock moth thing.
Yeah, there's a few others, but
and there are some other pests that aren't
Japanese beetles like hops pretty well, and there's aphids, a hop aphid that. But I mean, we've only had trouble with aphids like one season. I think. So for the most part, I think it's caterpillars, and they're pretty easy to control that way.
And what did you say to use it? Did you say BT?
Yeah, BT.
What is BT?
It's
it's an organic control.
Yeah.
You can buy it in the garden store and just mix it up with water and spray it on. Like I say, we use a backpack sprayer, which is
Bacillus thuringiensis.
Oh, very good. Yeah.
It basically these days it's like the toxin that comes from the bacterium. It's not the bacterium itself, but it's basically a bug that makes the caterpillars.
It's very safe to
die.
use.
It's not going to hurt anything else.
Right.
Kevin Ellis asks about deer. What about keeping deer and other animals away from your hops and your other garden as well?
Yeah, we use a dog.
Dogs work. Like a double electric fence works.
Right.
Depending on how big the area you're trying to keep them out. That mesh, you kind of hang the mesh off the trees.
Deer mesh.
That works
well.
too.
Yeah. We haven't had a big problem with deer ever since we started having a dog. They know he's there.
Yeah,
and, just
and if
away.
you have like sheep and cows, that's good too.
Well, yeah,
they don't like sheep or cows.
Yeah, once we started pasturing our fields, and actually running animals through them, it seemed to discourage the deer. They were much more of a problem before we did that. So I mean, these are all obviously these are farm kind of answers that I'm giving you, but deer can be, depending on your area and the deer density, they can be a real problem.
What about soap? I've seen people hang soap like on a rope.
Yeah,
soap on a rope.
I mean, I think this is another one of these area kind of things. It's like, you can put out predator poop, or you can put out human hair, or you can just scare them away with some kind of a scent. But if you've got a big area that you're trying to protect, I don't think those things will.
Right. If your hop yard is far from your house, then you might think about investing in some electric fence. And of course, deer can jump over most fences, but if you can kind of discourage them early in the season before they figure out there's something good to eat there, that they might be gone. They might not bother you all season.
Let's switch gears from hops. Seth the Clan asks, this year I'm considering challenging myself to not use hops and only brew gruits using high desert herbs I already have growing natively on the farm. Yarrow, sage, coriander, juniper, lavender, in addition to the spring barley I'm already growing.
I like this guy.
Mm-hmm.
However, I've only had a few commercial examples of gruits. Are some of the herbal combinations similar to the properties of hops, or is it going to be an acquired taste I'll hopefully acquire?
Ooh, yeah, I would say it's an acquired taste.
It's an acquired taste, but again, some of the herbs are definitely more toward bitter, and others are more toward herbal. I mean, something like horehound's going to be bitter, but it's also going to have a kind of a menthol quality to it. Something like dandelion is going to be bitter, but it's also going to be sour. I mean, there are definitely herbs out there that somebody who's used to drinking hoppy beers is not going to have any problem with. Mm-hmm. And then there are those that are not. But experiment is the key.
Yeah, you'll find a combination that you like, with probably a reasonable number of tries. And brewing small batches might be a way to get there too.
Yeah, or else you can always extract your brewing herbs with alcohol to get the flavors and experiment with the flavors.
Right. So you can add a drop of this or a drop of that.
We're big fans of small batches here on the podcast. So, I mean, could you follow some of the same rules that you would, say, in cooking with combining different spices? Are there families of herbs and spices that kind of go together?
You could do that. I mean, definitely, it's an area for exploration. But I mean, some of the brewing herbs will go with anything. Like ginger will go pretty much with anything.
Right. I mean, you look at some of these old recipes for gruits, and they use an incredible amount of material, and it's just an incredible array, enormous number of them. It just seems like it seems excessive, from the modern viewpoint, looking at what they were putting in the beer. But sometimes they were just dunking it in at the very end, just give it some flavor. So it wasn't necessarily that they were even brewing with it.
Then it's like 15 pounds of calamus root.
Yeah, that would knock you off your pins.
But for a 5-gallon barrel of porter or something,
right? So yeah.
I'm looking at the recipe for Mumm, M-U-M-M.
Brunswick Mumm.
And
yes.
it has a big long list of things, and on top of that list it says any 6 of the following.
Yeah.
There
exactly.
you go. You can mix and match. Yep, just like a salad bar.
Yeah.
Mumm is interesting. We compare it with Moxie, which is a local drink here, an old-fashioned soda. It's got that same sort of, make you stand up and pay attention kind of a taste.
Yeah.
Yep.
Eric Streckfuss asks, any suggestions for small indoor/windowsill plants that have high yield for us apartment dwellers? No space to grow hops, but would love to put something homegrown in my beer.
Okay. Yeah.
That's a good question.
Well, a rosemary in a pot. I mean, they do well indoors. And they're certainly a decent brewing herb.
Yep.
What are some others?
You can always do a pot full of ginger.
Yep. You could try growing hops in a pot. I don't know how well that would work, but sure. What else grows in pots? I mean, a lot of things can be grown successfully in pots, especially like mint, some of these smaller herbs. Lemon balm would be a good one, I think, and that you might want to pursue. Oregano would be one that you could also use in cooking, so there's no problem there. That's a good question. Because you can't, you can't really grow a window container full of, you could grow a window container full of barley and just for the fun of it.
Yeah.
I don't know how well it would work, but
well, can't you grow? Is it lemongrass that you can plant indoors in a little window box?
Yep, people do. Yeah.
Brent Jacobson says, any tips for companion planting or what I should definitely not plant with my hops?
Okay. Well, don't plant perennial weeds around your hops.
Don't plant anything that's really aggressive with your hops. Just grow right into the rhizomes.
Yeah, we're growing hops next to my house. We're growing hops in a rock garden with other herbs, and it's surprising how they haven't taken over. The hops have not taken over the area. The other herbs haven't bothered the hops, so they all seem to be living in sort of a happy community there. Wasn't really what I was expecting, but it seems to be working. I can't think of anything that really would qualify that way, unless it was just something so aggressive that it would crowd out the hops. But yeah, that's another thing. Perennial weeds are a problem with hop growers because they're there. They want to be there. The hops want to be there. And there's no, they're not going to die off because it gets cold or something. They're going to live underneath. I'm thinking of quackgrass is particularly a difficult one to control around hops. So that the idea of growing them in a rock garden where you can kind of keep bare soil there around them is not a bad idea because you can just pull those grasses right out. And another way, mulch is another good way to control perennial weeds around hops.
You said the word mulch. Eric Weller said, is spent grain good for garden mulch?
Well,
It's good for compost. I know that much.
Yeah, we've never really tried it. I mean, I think
that might bring the rodents.
it might. It certainly would. It would bring chickens as well.
It would definitely bring chickens.
And I think that if you heaped up spent grains and you had that many, it would just kind of compost and heat up.
Yeah.
And if you didn't have enough to compost and heat up, it might like dry up and blow away. So I don't
know. It might work, though.
I mean, it's possible. I mean, it's worth an experiment.
I mean, if you got a lot of spent grains and you want to do something with them, that might be a thing to try.
Chad Adams asks for a recommendation for a supplier of seeds for brewing herbs, yarrow, heather, etc. Also, what's the best way to prep said items for storage or fresh use?
Okay, that's
We talk about that in the book.
We do talk about that in the book. We use Johnny's Selected Seeds as our primary supplier of seeds. We also and Fedco.
Fedco.
These are both Maine, but they're you can get them all around the country.
A lot of the brewing herbs are pretty readily available. A lot of the seeds.
Right. And also, we're talking about barley. You can get barley through Johnny's. You can buy small amounts of barley seed for growing.
Yeah. Is it johnnyseeds.com?
Is that right? Johnny Selected. Keep talking. I'll find the catalog.
I got my barley through Johnny Seeds. I don't know if that's the same.
Yeah, I think it is the same. It's Johnny Selected Seeds, but I think it's johnnyseeds.com.
And yes, it is.
We did an interview with the president of Colorado Malting Company a couple weeks ago, and they also sell barley seed as well.
Oh, good. Yeah. Well, when we started out, it was very hard in our area, at least, to get barley to grow, and we ended up we just went to the health food store and found the barley that looked nice and plump, so it was probably 2-row, and just started growing that. And you could have also gone directly to companies that produce the seeds and ask for small amounts, but it's much easier now to get barley seed to grow in small amounts for gardeners.
Pat Rasmus asks, how much space is required to grow your own grain? I mean, how much? If I had been successful in my 30-foot by 40-foot garden of barley, how much could I have gotten out of that?
Okay. Well, I grew conlon last year that I got from Johnny's at the 2-row, and I put in a 30 by 100 bed, and I ended up harvesting about 15 pounds of seed. It was not a great year for growing. It was too wet, and then it was too dry, and it was pretty challenging. And so I was happy to get what I got. I don't know if this yield, necessarily. And then, because most people who grow barley, of course, are growing it by the acre. So it's sometimes hard to figure out exactly what your yields ought to be. We were happy to get that. We're gonna, we'll turn it into a few specialty grains for ourselves. And it depends a lot on, your conditions, your rainfall, your weed pressure, your timing. It's really hard to say what a good yield would be, but that was my yield from so it was about 300 square feet. So.
Well, I think we've covered all the listener questions either directly or indirectly through the answers. But I do have a project that I want to get your feedback on.
Sure.
I have a friend who is a farmer who usually grows Bermuda grass, but he's been growing Bermuda grass for a long time, and he wants to turn his fields over to something else and let them, kind of do something else for a while, which I take it as smart management.
Sure.
But he is growing red winter wheat, I believe, and I think he's got like 120 acres.
Okay.
Of his stuff.
Yes.
Now I know you can make a 100% wheat beer from malted wheat because I've done so.
Yeah.
So my project for myself is to say, Randy, my farmer friend, can you give me 25 pounds of of wheat at the after you harvest it,
Yep.
and I want to make beer out of your wheat and my hops.
Sure.
What's the best strategy?
Okay. Well, one reason that barley became so popular as a brewing ingredient is that it's easy to malt compared with a lot of the other grains. Wheat is a little more challenging, but I think, and 25 pounds is a lot.
Yeah, 25 pounds is a lot.
Yeah, and I figured I threw out 25 pounds because I figure I'm going to need some margin for error there. So what are your tips? What should I look out for?
Okay, so the steeping process is much shorter. So that's similar to Okay, we did cover this. We just did a talk in New York about early American brewing, and one person who got involved with malting wheat was actually Thomas Jefferson, and he started out with wheat, and then he went to corn. And wheat can be challenging. You need a short steeping process, which we actually don't say how long. But I would start with a
very long kilning process. We also don't say how long to do that either.
Let's see, 178 degrees, and also the sprouting process is tough with wheat because you need a long acrospire, much longer than you have for barley.
It's not merely a case of you wait until the acrospire is 3/4 of the grain.
No, it actually has to be a couple inches long.
Yeah, it has to have emerged from the grain.
Right. So at the turning process, where you're actually turning the
heap of grain.
heap in order to just control temperature and so forth, you have to be much more careful than you do with barley. Barley you can take some handling, but wheat has to be might be kind of delicate. I think I would definitely think about using an air stone and sort of a bucket system, and then maybe you could get the air moving through without necessarily having to turn it, which would be helpful with wheat because then you wouldn't damage the acrospire.
And the acrospire is the little baby plant, essentially.
Yes, exactly.
And in barley, that plant doesn't come out of the end of the seed before you stop the germination process.
In wheat, it does.
Wow.
Now, I'm thinking that there's probably a lot of information online about this, but we're just speculating here. But I think that's where I'd start. I'd start with a couple of pounds. I'd give it a short soak time. I would give it an air stone, which you could, just basically, a lot of grain brewers use an air stone anyway, so you can use the same one. Get some air moving through it. Keep an eye on it so it doesn't get moldy or slippery. And you probably will need to turn it at some point. And then when the acrospire gets a couple inches long, then it's time to kiln it. And which can be done in an oven. Definitely for small batches. So I think it'd be an interesting experiment.
Well, if it works out, I'll send you some.
Okay, thank you.
At least let us know how it goes.
Well, Joe and Dennis, this has been a lot of fun.
Great. Yeah,
and I'm gonna delve back. I've been meaning to do a gruit for a long time, and I just never have gotten around to it.
Sure.
But I'm gonna delve back in your book, and my friend Steve and I, he has an herb garden every year. We need to just jump right in and give it a try.
Sure. Great.
Cool.
Well, I appreciate your time. I know everybody else appreciates your answers to their questions.
Yeah, this has been fun. Happy to have a chance to do it.
Well, thanks again to Joe and Dennis. And I'll keep you posted on my goal of brewing a 100% local wheat beer as time goes on. Wish me luck with that. I think I'll need it. If you have brewing questions, show suggestions, or just want to say howdy, write to james@basicbrewing.com or just fill out the contact form on basicbrewing.com. And please don't forget to tell us where you're from. Our new Basic Brewing growler bags are available in our shop. Protect your precious homebrew and craft beer as you take it from place to place. as the weather warms up this season here in the Northern Hemisphere. Check out our new support link where you can throw a couple of bucks into the tip jar by subscribing financially to our podcasts. Be sure to check out our DVDs, as always, Extract Brewing and Partial Mashing, Stepping into All Grain, Low-Tech Lagering and Decoction Mashing, and Introduction to Wine Kits. You can find them all on our site. We got combo deals to save you a couple of bucks, along with some shirts there, too. Our Brewers Logbooks are in there, too. And you can see a listing of the fine folks across the country who sell our DVDs on basicbrewing.com. And if there isn't a vendor in your area, you can order them online in our online shop at basicbrewingshop.com. Thanks to everybody who's continued to click on our Amazon.com link. We appreciate the support there. Our featured products this week that were purchased through the link are Mexican Miniature Watermelon, 15 seeds, Melothria scabra. It goes along with the theme of this week's show. Also sounds like some sort of a spell. Melothria scabra. And Monty Python Flux, the ever-changing Monty Python card game. Plus, free wooden box. Thanks again, everybody. Remember, I can't tell who bought what, so no worries there. Just click on the Amazon.com logo on our site the next time you feel like Amazon shopping. We greatly appreciate your support. Nee! And don't forget that you can also join the American Homebrewers Association or subscribe to Brew Your Own magazine. They're not mutually exclusive. They're not exclusive. Through the associate link on basicbrewing.com. I need more coffee. That's all until next week. Until then, thanks for listening, everybody. I'm James Spencer. Production help for Basic Brewing Radio and our website is provided by our buddy Kelly Dodson down in Austin, Texas. Basic Brewing Radio is a production of Active Voicing. We'll talk to you next time, everybody. So long.